how did really going through that did your mindset concerning addiction maybe change?
I'll be honest, the show had nothing to do with that.
Mm,
I was barely involved. I was involved on the business side of that show. My business partner, Jason Hervey, was working directly with Tim throughout that whole process. I never even stepped on the set because I was busy producing other things, and that was Jason's project. I didn't really get to know Tim until after that project was over
mm,
and aired on A&E, and a certain amount of time went by. And one day Tim Ryan reached out to me and said, hey, by that time, Jason Hervey and I had dissolved our production company, amicably, we're still friends, but he kind of went his way and I went my way. And then Tim called me one day and said, hey, I'd really like to get this show going. I know, had a special on A&E, but I think it could be a series. So I started working closely with Tim on that. But the show didn't have any impact on me, to be
mm.
honest, because I already had a pretty strong opinion about addiction. And because of working with guys like Scott Hall, but he was only one.
Right.
If I look back, I don't even like to think about it. The number of people that I worked with, peers, guys a lot younger than me, that I worked with and had different levels of relationships with, that all died because of drugs. I saw it. I saw what alcohol did to people. I've been around people for the better part of 30 years that, you sit down with them and shoot the shit and everything's great. And they're fun people and they're fun to be around. You go out and you have a drink with them. And for the first 2 or 3 drinks, they're a good time and everybody's laughing. By drink number 4, they turn into mean people. They get bitter and angry and mean. And I've been around people I'm not exaggerating. I've been around people that went from Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde over the course of 3 beers. And when you see that happen in front of you, you go, what the hell? It doesn't take a very intelligent person at all to realize that, man, some people shouldn't drink.
Yeah.
And obviously people shouldn't, I watch guys, Louis Spicoli, young guy, wrestled, for WCW, passed away. Ray Traylor, another good friend of mine, took my son deer hunting. My son got his very first deer with Ray Traylor and Rick Steiner. Ray Traylor passed away because he was drinking and doing somas.
Yeah.
A muscle relaxer. It was a bad combination. And that combination of alcohol and prescription drugs has probably killed more of my friends than anything. And I was well aware of that. Now, what I wasn't aware of until after getting to know Tim was the extent of the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
And how heroin made its resurgence. When I was a teenager in the 60s and early 70s, I knew what heroin was. Everybody knew what heroin was, but the people that did heroin were like the destitute, bottom of the barrel, homeless, just they were a different class of, it wasn't like smoking weed and mushrooms and having fun. These were people that were like into the poison. Well, I realized after meeting Tim and having conversations with Tim that heroin was no longer a junkie's disease initially.
Yeah.
It was a blue collar disease. It was a white collar disease. There was heroin everywhere. And then I learned that one of the reasons that heroin is everywhere is because doctors in the pharmaceutical industry were overprescribing opioids in the form of Vicodin and Percocet and all the other goodies for so long. And when those drugs became no longer so easily available because the federal government finally realized that, all of a sudden they shut down the supply of heroin. The pain clinics that existed in Florida, I've seen them.
Yeah.
When they existed, before Florida cracked down on pain clinics, you could literally walk in, and I've done it, by the way, done it. One of my favorite cocktails back in the day was what was called a starter kit. A
Mm.
starter kit was a Vicodin of a substantial strength. I don't remember what the milligrams were anymore, but a substantially strong Vicodin along with 2 mini thins. Mini thins were the little caffeine stimulants you could buy over the counter at 7-Eleven. And then you mix 2 mini thins of Vicodin and about 3 or 4 beers, and you were off for a fun ride for a while until you weren't, until you started doing too much of it. And so I know how easy it was to go in and get a prescription for Vicodin.
Yeah.
Wow, man, I sprained my elbow, doc. Can I get some Vicodin? Oh yeah, here's 120. Here's a prescription of 120. Let me know if you need a refill. You go to the dentist, get a tooth pulled. Oh, here's 30 Vicodin. Well, I've had a whole bunch of dental work done recently, implants and all kinds of other stuff. I never took a pain pill. The last time I never even took an aspirin because you don't need it. Yeah. But when doctors would just give it to you, what do most people do? Oh, fuck, I'll try it, see what that's like. But when all that shut down and you couldn't get it anymore, that's when the heroin industry started really growing, becoming.
This is the Knockin' Doorz Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knockin' Doorz Down is all about.
This podcast contains the views and opinions of the Knockin' Doorz Down hosts and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is sharing their unique perspective, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. Privacy is of the utmost importance to us. For those wishing anonymity, people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect confidentiality at the request of certain guests. This website or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship. If you find any errors in any of the content of this podcast or blogs, please send a message through the contact page. This podcast is owned by KDD Media Company.